the news, no smoking gun. Democrats kicked off their public impeachment inquiry on Wednesday, and some say it was a real snoozer. Ephraim Graham has more on this story from our CBN newsroom. Here's Ephraim.
Pat, now that the impeachment inquiry is out in the open, what did we find out? Well, that depends on who you ask. Democrats and the media call it a bombshell. Republicans say it's just more of the same. Jenna Browder brings us the story now from Washington.
Democrats are trying to make their case to the American people. And while it was a long, drawn-out process with little new information yesterday, we did learn about another phone call.
Could not be explained. It was crazy.
U.S. diplomat in Ukraine Bill Taylor and senior State Department official George Kent both testified that President Trump ordered nearly $400 million in military aid withheld from Ukraine for political purposes. Then came that revelation from Taylor. He said one of his staffers overheard EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland on the phone with President Trump.
The member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden.
President Trump says he doesn't remember the conversation.
I know nothing about that. First time I've heard it. The one thing I've seen that Sondland said was that he did speak to me for a brief moment, and I said no quid pro quo under any circumstances, and that's true.
On the Biden corruption front, Kent said he was concerned about the vice president's son's role at a Ukrainian gas company.
There was the possibility of a perception of a conflict of interest.
Republicans focused on the end result, that the White House did release military aid to Ukraine, and there was no investigation into the Bidens. They also noted that Taylor and Kent are relying on secondhand information.
Ambassador, you weren't on the call, were you?
I did not.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
What stood out to you today?
One word, hearsay. We heard it all the time. If we're going to play this game of telephone, I heard it from that person, who heard it from that person. Now we're into fourth hand. What in the world does that mean?
CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, on the network's Faith Nation.
I'll be honest with you, I thought it was a bit of a snoozer today.
And Taylor's staffer, who says he overheard that phone call, will testify privately tomorrow. Also taking the stand publicly is former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
And the hearing continues, Pat.
Well, without question, the thing is rigged. Schiff has gotten the candidates he wants. He's probably rejecting some of the ones the Republicans want. They want to interview the Biden's son to find out about Burisma and some of the money that's been given to him by the people over there in the Ukraine. You know, there's no question Russia invaded Ukraine. They took over a whole part of the country and nationalized it into Russia. They did bad things, and the Obama administration said no lethal aid to help those people in the Ukraine trying to resist Russian aggression. Trump has done just the opposite. He has released military aid to them, missiles that they need. He's also let go all that humanitarian aid that they were talking about. It wasn't a question of withholding. It's come forth. He let it all go. So what is impeachable? They haven't gotten any impeachable, in my opinion. But from what word we get is that there's going to be a trial in the Senate. Mitch McConnell said, not only is it going to be a trial, but we're going to have it during January and maybe February. So in case any of those senators think they're going to run in Iowa and other states for the presidency, they will not be able to do it because we're going to hold them in Washington to hear the, quote, trial that's going to take place. I thought the Democrats wouldn't have the intestinal fortitude to actually vote impeachment, and they still haven't done it yet, so we'll see. Ephraim? Meltdown mode. That's what the never-Trumpers have been in since the 2016 election. They've drummed up unprecedented investigations by the FBI, a sham impeachment process, and a complicit media just plays along. So what's the long-term damage to our democracy? David Brody sat down with Wall Street Journal columnist Kim Strassel for some very cogent answers.
According
to Webster's, the definition of resistance is pretty straightforward. A refusal to accept or comply with something. It happens all the time. Children resist bedtime. Adults resist change. In Donald Trump's case, the resistance can be described as a movement of biblical proportions.
They've been plotting to overthrow the election since the first hour that we won.
Wall Street Journal columnist Kimberly Strassel seeks to explain who the they is in the book called Resistance at All Cost, How Trump Haters Are Breaking America.
These were the folks who, from the very moment Donald Trump was elected, they viewed him as illegitimate and occupying that office, and that they were therefore, in extension, allowed to take any actions they wanted to get rid of him.
Strassel argues that criticism of the president is one thing, but blind rage that crosses barriers and undermines our institutions is a whole other level.
The very beginning of the resistance, and one of the first examples of what I call undiagnosed Trump derangement syndrome, is Jim Comey.
And Strassel thinks Comey's multiple sneaky moves are at the top of the resistance list, like taking private notes while meeting with Trump and then leaking them to get a special counsel appointed in the Russian investigation.
It is still astonishing to me that we are saying out loud that the FBI launched a counterintelligence investigation into a presidential campaign. I mean, this is beyond all reasonable things you do.
And as Strassel points out, reasonable and resistance don't usually go hand in hand. Look at the judiciary, for example. One by one, a judge somewhere in America can impose his or her view on the entire country by proclaiming a nationwide injunction time after time against Trump policies.
There's a presumption that the executive branch gets the kind of benefit of the doubt when it comes out. They're ignoring all of this stuff just because they can't stand the guy. And so, but it's doing damage to our judicial system.
Although they often claim it is the president doing the damage.
The institutions of our government are under assault because of this president, and he could do some damage.
He's eroding our democracy.
I do think he is a bit norm-breaking, but if you step back and you look objectively, it tends to be mostly in his speech, in his rhetoric, in his tweets, and in his demeanor in office. It's harder to make the case that that in any way affects his departments or his policy, or, in fact, I think if you step back, this has been one of the more rule-bound administrations that we have had in a very long time.
Lines like that will send the Trump haters into an angry meltdown. They see Trump as the one breaking rules and now want him impeached. What are you hearing out there and kind of in real America, if you will?
Anger. And it is anger. You know, we talk about the anger of the resistance, but there is real, serious anger among average Americans about what they see happening, the lack of due process, the constant accusations of criminal activity.
Strassel says we've seen this behavior before.
And I hope that the American people will see through this charade.
She sees the Brett Kavanaugh hearings as all part of the resistance effort.
There's a lot of examples of that. Impeachment as a partisan political tool, you know, the degradation of the Senate confirmation process, the lack of trust we have in the DOJ and the FBI. If we don't start calling out some of this behavior and holding people accountable right now, it will only get worse regardless of whether Donald Trump is president or not.
It's not just one party either. The resistance has come from what some describe as the deep state and also within the walls of the White House.
People will justify this and say, well, you must follow your moral conscience. No, your job is, in fact, to do your job. The president was elected to institute policies.
They often get help from a complicit media, writing damaging headlines while hiding behind generic and anonymous sourcing regarding vital and sensitive national security information.
When you have people out there saying a U.S. government official, they are purposely attempting to cloak that they have been talking to a partisan, but they don't want you to know that they're talking to a partisan. It's bad behavior.
It all begs one final question. While these resistance haters call Trump bad for America, what have their actions possibly done to cause our country major harm?
They need to understand that they have so convinced themselves that he's doing all this damage, and it's that terrible human failing we all have, right? Where often the things we accuse other people of doing are the things we are doing ourselves.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
In fact, the Democrats, after Hillary Clinton lost, just thought we owned the government, and this man's stolen it away from us. And so we're going to do everything we can to take him down so he can't do it anymore. And to think that the FBI, they've not only Comey, but other members of the FBI, McCabe and others, and that terrible business that was going on between those two FBI agents to say, how can we defeat the president? I mean, the FBI is not commissioned to do that. They should have been fired on the spot. They should have been prosecuted. And I think a member of these, when you look at national security advisors and others who've done this sort of thing, they should not be allowed to have any confidential information. And many of them should be prosecuted because they are breaking the law. Terry?
Well, when Trump said one of the reasons he was going to Washington was to drain the swamp, do you think he had any clue how deep the swamp was?
He didn't know how many alligators were out there, and there are plenty of them. But, you know, he's got people working in his own administration, and they think they're on some moral crusade, and they have... But you look at what some of these entertainers have said. You know, they've used all kinds of profanity to describe Trump. Trump is really doing a good job. He's cut down all kinds of regulations. He's lowered taxes. He's made the job of the workers much easier. He's built up our economy tremendously. And for these people to have this Trump derangement syndrome, it's like it's a